Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. We're lucky to be here, fortunate to have with us Daniel Rubenstein. He's the Middle East affairs expert, joining us from Tel Aviv. And so let's just get into it. Welcome, and thanks for being with us today, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get into it. Okay. Well, there's a big article today. Well, let's not talk about domestic affairs first. Let's talk in Israel. Let's talk about what's going on with the conflict. So Gaza. Now, can you kind of help us, walk us through, the last we heard there was a ceasefire, there was a prisoner exchange, and now the violence has started again, and tanks are rolling across into Gaza again. Kind of walk us through the current situation there.
Yeah, the big picture is that Israel is facing an enemy with no red lines. The Hamas terrorist organization governs the Gaza Strip, and its goal is the destruction of Israel. And it made its goal very clear on October 7th when it invaded, massacred, raped, and took 251 hostages. In recent months, we saw the release of some of these hostages because Israel was willing to pay an enormous ransom to the Hamas terrorist army in order to see the return of 33 Israeli hostages, some of them living, some of them dead. Israel has always been clear that its goals of the war are the destruction of the Hamas terrorist army and its removal from power in Gaza, and also the safe return of every hostage that Hamas is holding. It is a very difficult war. Israel was agreeing to give a ransom to Hamas, but it was not agreeing to allow Hamas to win the war, meaning Israel is not going to withdraw from Gaza and declare an end to the war while the Hamas terrorist army, which pledges to carry out more October 7th massacres, is still in power. That's why we have seen a return to Israeli military operations in the Gaza Strip, because we need to pressure the Hamas terrorist regime to lay down its arms and release the hostages. And until this happens, the war is unfortunately going to continue.
Okay, well, let's dissect that. So there's two things you just said: return the hostages and lay down their arms. Okay, so if all the hostages, and as everyone acknowledges, not all of them are still alive, unfortunately. If they were to return all the living and the remains of the dead hostages, are you saying that would not be the end? There would be additional conflict until they lay down their arms? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm absolutely saying this. The reason that Hamas took hostages in the first place was so that it could get away with the greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. That's why Hamas took hostages, so that it could force Israel to pay such an enormous price that Hamas would get away with the massacre. If Hamas gets away with the massacre, that would put the state of Israel in mortal danger. If the Hamas terrorist army is still alive and well in Gaza, it's walking distance from Gaza to Israeli villages. So Hamas already showed us what they're capable of. We're not going to go back to an October 6th reality where Hamas is in a position to do this again. So Hamas doesn't just need to release the hostages, it needs to give up power in Gaza.
I mean, how is that verifiable? I mean, listen, I spent a lot of time in the region myself, of course. And when you talk to Gaza, you talk about Gaza. I mean, when you say lay down their arms, I mean, first of all, Hamas is not like everybody's raising their hand saying, "Hey, I'm Hamas, I'm going to lay down my arms." I mean, how do you know, and how can you verify that Hamas has met the second requirement? I mean, the first one's not easy. You can know who the hostages are and if they return. But how is the second part of that going to be verified? So we know the conflict's going to end.
I think there's a few ways we can verify. If those in Gaza who are holding hostages agree to give up those hostages and go into exile in exchange for keeping their lives, that would be one point of reference. Another point of reference is if Hamas no longer has an army. It no longer has a fighting force. Yes, there may be some people in Gaza who maintain weapons, but the Hamas terror regime, the terror army, needs to be dismantled. And I think the most critical point of reference that we'll know when this war is over is if Gaza has a different government that is not Hamas. Right now, Hamas is the government of Gaza. Hamas controls the economy of Gaza. Hamas taxes all the food and supplies in Gaza and uses that revenue to fund its army and to pay the people who are holding hostages and to recruit new members to its terrorist army. So once we see Hamas no longer in control of the economy of Gaza, of the government of Gaza, then we'll know that the war is over.
And so how would you respond to critics who say that this is kind of a moving goalpost? Because this whole, I mean, listen, there's always been the stated goal of Israel to destroy Hamas. It's always been since day one. There's no doubt about that. But now you're talking about some of these people would have to go into exile. Is the goalpost moving? Would you argue it is or it isn't?
I don't think the goalpost is moving at all. When I say that some Hamas people could go into exile, that's an Israeli concession. That is an offer to Hamas, to the commanders who remain alive, that if they wish to remain alive and end the war, this is an out for them. But Israel's goals from the beginning have been always the dismantlement of Hamas's terrorist army, the removal of the Hamas government from power in Gaza, and the safe return of the hostages. These are very difficult goals, and that's why this war has been going on for a year and a half. Hamas is a very determined enemy, and it's determined to continue holding hostages forever and waging war forever.
Okay, so just for the audience, I mean, you basically have two pockets of Palestinians in Israel. You have the Gaza Strip and you have the West Bank. The West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority, but Israel has made it very clear that when you talk about a changing government in Gaza, okay, who is it going to be? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't you stated that the Palestinian Authority is not an accepted alternative to Hamas?
You're right to zoom out beyond the Gaza Strip and look at the bigger picture, which is that Israel is in a seven-front war, not just in Gaza. We also are facing the Iranian regime and its proxies in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, militias in Iraq, and so on. So the situation in the West Bank is such that the Palestinian Authority, a different Palestinian government, a rival to Hamas, is governing in cooperation with Israel. This government, the Palestinian Authority, used to govern Gaza. They failed in Gaza, and in 2007, Hamas purged them out of Gaza. There was a civil war, and Hamas threw the Palestinian Authority guys off of rooftops and took power. The Palestinian Authority has not been eager to enter Gaza and take power because it just doesn't have the capability or the desire to be seen as cooperating with Israel in the takeover of Gaza, and its people would not be safe there because Hamas seeks to be the sole representative of the Palestinian people and considers the Palestinian Authority an enemy. So it is an option. It's not a desirable one for a different government to govern Gaza. But if you look at what the Palestinian Authority has accomplished in the West Bank, its record is not very good. In cities like Jenin in the northern West Bank, Hamas is very popular, and the Palestinian Authority has not been able to crack down on Hamas there with Israeli help in the northern West Bank. So I'm not optimistic that the Palestinian Authority would be able to do the same thing in Gaza.
But whether you're optimistic or not, would you accept, would the Israeli, not you personally, but would the Israeli government accept the Palestinian Authority if they said, listen, we will take on the responsibility of rebuilding Gaza and governing Gaza, would the Israeli government be open to that?
I think if it was a viable option, it would have to be studied carefully because it is possible to achieve the war aims that I explicitly stated and also have the Palestinian Authority return in some form to govern the Gaza Strip. So if the Gaza Strip does not have a Hamas military, if it doesn't have a Hamas government, and if no one is holding hostages in Hamas, then it is an option that the Palestinian Authority could return to govern the Gaza Strip. But ultimately, it's a question for the Palestinian people themselves, for the Palestinian government that cooperates with Israel in the West Bank, what they want and what they expect. And right now, it's very unclear.
Listen, you're an excellent spokesperson. I love, I do politics around the world. I love how you say things. It's very impressive. But once again, it's a simple yes or no question. I know you say they'll explore it, but what is the alternative? If the Palestinian Authority doesn't come into Gaza, I mean, listen, we all agree that once Hamas gives up the all the hostages and the war comes to an end, and all the Hamas fighters say, "Listen, I give up," and whatever may happen there. Somebody has to govern it, right? Somebody has to control it. If it's not the Palestinian Authority, who would it be? Who would you accept? Who would the Israeli government accept to govern Gaza?
The reason I don't give you a clear yes or no is because I don't speak for the Israeli government and I don't speak for the Palestinian Authority, and I'm attempting to give my analysis of what is possible. So I'm saying it is possible. I don't know how probable. In terms of an alternative, it's time to use our imaginations and think bigger, that the people of Gaza should have their own government that provides them services and a sense of security that the Hamas government has not been able to provide. Every people should have a government that is from them, by them, and for them. And that might require some imagination outside the box of what's been done in the past. But Gaza is a territory, it has a population, and it should have a new government. And ultimately, it's not for me as a non-Palestinian to tell them what their government should be. I'm simply giving some guidelines, namely that the Hamas terrorist army should not have a military and be the government and hold hostages. And if we can accomplish these things, then we need to be a bit flexible on who will the government be.
No, I know. And listen, I mean, that's one of the issues. I mean, governing is a critical thing because really the conflict can't end until, that there's a way. I mean, listen, if the conflict ended tomorrow, somebody's got to govern that land.
Yes.
Somebody has to help rebuild it. And so I guess, what is the mechanism there for elections? Because I don't even know that. So if they were to say, listen, I don't even know who they would be to say we want to hold elections. Who's actually, you said Hamas is governing Gaza. So that whole governmental structure of Hamas must go and leave for there to be new governing. So I don't even understand. I mean, I know you're an expert. I'm trying to understand exactly how that materializes. I mean, somebody's got to step into the void. Maybe there's a temporary government. But if the Palestinian Authority were to say, listen, we will step in temporarily and help prepare things for elections, would that be an acceptable alternative at this moment in time, in your opinion?
If there's no Hamas government in Gaza and there's no Hamas military and they're not holding hostages, then it's an acceptable alternative. But ultimately, how the Palestinians govern themselves is a question for Palestinians. You asked about elections. The Palestinian Authority government, which governs Palestinians in the West Bank, has not had a presidential election in more than 20 years. The current president, his name is Mahmoud Abbas. He's well into his 80s. He's in the 20th or 21st year of a 4-year term. He has not held elections for the simple reason that he's not so popular. And guess who is popular? Hamas. When the Palestinians had legislative elections in 2006, which included Gaza and the West Bank, Hamas won these elections. And the Palestinian Authority did not want to give up power in its legislature after Hamas won. Israel did not want to allow Hamas to take power because Hamas is not committed to the peaceful framework that led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority in the first place, and Hamas wanted to destroy Israel. And the United States didn't want to allow Hamas to take power and represent a terrorist group on the world stage. So this situation where Hamas won an election and couldn't take power led to Hamas seizing power violently. So in terms of how the Palestinians are going to have elections, that's a question for them to answer and not me as an Israeli analyst. But ultimately, we have to think that something like the Marshall Plan and the rebuilding of Germany came after the defeat of Nazi Germany. We are still in the middle of a war where the Hamas terrorist army is willing and eager to keep fighting, and it has the money to keep fighting. And all of our focus is on removing the Hamas terrorist regime from power and seeing the safe return of the hostages.
Well, you talk about there's a 7-front war against Israel, so let's talk about another front, Syria. What's going on in Syria? What is the long-term plan, do you believe, of the Netanyahu government when it comes to Syria?
I think the plan for Syria is just to look at it and wait and see and be very cautious about what's happening in Syria. Israel does not have a plan of its own for how to govern Syria or how to turn Syria into some type of friendly state. We have enough going on within our own borders and within the active fronts that Syria is a place where we simply have to be cautious. The Iranian regime was very present in Syria, trying to establish itself and open another front against Israel from Syria. And now Syria has a new government called HTS in English. And this government is a conglomerate, an umbrella group of organizations that describe themselves as offshoots of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, and so on. These are the types of people who are ideologically committed to the destruction of Israel. They are busy themselves with the situation in Syria, but Israel must be very careful about who is governing in Syria, and Israel is not willing to take any chances about who's governing in Syria and who may be approaching the Israeli border and opening fire. So in the middle term, in the near term, Israel is saying to this new government of Syria, which has an Islamist bent, that it's not acceptable for your army to enter parts of southern Syria that are near our border. And until we find out who you are and what your intentions are, we are going to be very much on guard.
Well, let's just go up to Lebanon. Let's talk about Lebanon real quick. I mean, there is, the ceasefire there required, I think, Israel to leave after, 60 days, I believe what it was, or 90 days, I can't remember what it is. But Israel still maintains a presence in Lebanon. Help us understand what's happening there.
Yes, Israel and the government of Lebanon agreed to a ceasefire that was to last 60 days. This was a few months ago already that Israel and the government of Lebanon agreed to a ceasefire. Of course, Israel wasn't in a conflict with the government of Lebanon, but that's the address when you're talking to Lebanon. We're effectively talking about Hezbollah. Hezbollah in Arabic means party of God. This is a militia in Lebanon that doesn't answer to the government of Lebanon. It answers to the Iranian regime. And this Hezbollah terrorist army, one day after the October 7th massacre, decided to open a second front against Israel on October 8th, 2023. And Hezbollah since that time fired nearly 20,000 rockets, guided anti-tank missiles, suicide drones into Israel. What Hezbollah was trying to do was relieve the pressure from the Sinwar regime in Gaza, the Hamas regime in Gaza. So Hezbollah forced 60,000 Israelis in northern Israel to flee their homes because Hezbollah was shooting at them. And at the end of this war that Israel found itself with Hezbollah in Lebanon, the two sides agreed to a ceasefire. The ceasefire requires that Hezbollah disarm, that Hezbollah not be present as a militia in southern Lebanon, and it requires that the government of Lebanon disarm it. This hasn't happened. It's not really a surprise, but what's different this time is that Israel is not going to wait for the international community, for the United Nations, for the United States, for France to do something to pressure Hezbollah and the government of Lebanon to disarm it. Israel is not going to sit and wait while the Iranian regime rearms Hezbollah and rebuilds Hezbollah right on the border next to Israeli villages. So Israel is going to remain in southern Lebanon as long as it sees fit in order to keep the Hezbollah terrorist army away from Israeli homes.
You know, the new president of Lebanon has stated publicly, of course, that he believes, General Oun believes that that the Lebanese armed forces should help try to disarm Hezbollah and get rid of Hezbollah. He believes there should just be one military force in Lebanon. Does Israel have a good relationship with President Oun, or do they believe that he will take the proper action?
I don't know that Israel believes much of anything coming out of the government of Lebanon because actions speak louder than words. It's not about words, it's not about public comments, it's about actions and capabilities. And we're not seeing much right now from the government of Lebanon to send the Lebanese army into southern Lebanon, to take Hezbollah positions, to push Hezbollah away from the border, to collect weapons from Hezbollah, to stop the smuggling of Iranian weapons into Lebanon. These are the kinds of steps that Israel is looking for, and until we see these steps, we're going to be concerned.
Well, one of the issues, of course, for the Lebanese armed forces is the fact there are international sanctions against the country. So even the Lebanese armed forces is trying to rebuild their military to the point that they can actually take action, but because of some of the sanctions, they're having a very difficult time. I mean, but you would have to. Well, I'm not put words in your mouth. But at least Lebanon now has a president, so they have some leadership, and you do see that Hezbollah's influence in the government has reduced. A lot more can happen, of course, but it's a much better situation than it was, say, a year ago. Wouldn't you agree with that?
It's a low bar to say that the situation is better than a year ago, because a year ago, Hezbollah was firing rockets and anti-tank missiles and suicide drones into Israel. Now we're seeing it less, but every so often we still have attacks from Lebanon. What I would like to see from the government of Lebanon is not just statements from the president, but actions from the parliament. We don't need a piece of paper from Lebanon. We should have peace with Lebanon. There is no reason for conflict between Lebanon and Israel. Israel has no claim on Lebanon, wants nothing to do with Lebanon. There should be peace with Lebanon and the people of Lebanon, and we should put this war behind us, all of these wars behind us. And a simple test of this is to watch to see if the Lebanese parliament and the Lebanese people call for an unconditional end of its war with Israel and the clear establishment of a border between Lebanon and Israel. And let's move on from all of this. That's what I want to see more than any statement or something like that from the president. Let's see the parliament call for peace with Israel and do it.
Okay, well, let's talk about one of the other fronts. Okay, there's so many fronts going on here. Well, let's talk about Iran. I mean, the word is that there's a possibility of an attack either led by the United States or Israel against the nuclear facilities in Iran. I mean, what do you say? What do you see the future between Israel and Iran being? And do you think there's a possibility of some type of preemptive strike against the nuclear facilities there?
I see the potential for a great future between Israel and the people of Iran, but what I have been seeing for decades is the Iranian regime has a different idea. The Iranian regime is ideologically committed to the destruction of Israel. It's the Iranian regime that provided support to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. So whichever groups that are sworn to Israel's destruction, Iran has made sure to support them, especially Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's an immediate proxy of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. For the Iranian regime to seek the destruction of Israel and to develop a nuclear weapons capability is a terrifying prospect for Israel, and the government of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, has been very clear that we will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapons capability. Iran does not seem to have gotten the message. We hope that it does get the message. But yes, we have to be super concerned about the Iranian development of nuclear weapons. There's a former president of Iran who referred to Israel as a one-bomb country. What this means is that one nuclear weapon over Israel is the end of Israel. We're a country that can fit inside Lake Michigan in the United States. We're about 9 million people. We're very small. We simply don't have the margin of safety that other countries may have.
No, yeah, and everyone has got to look out for their own independent safety. I understand that. But how would you respond to, and we only have like a minute here left. So let's talk about the number of people who have died. Now, October 7th, the most heinous example of attacks against the Jews in the world scene, as you said, since the Holocaust. But by all estimates, I mean, we can argue whether it's 50,000 Gazans dead or 60,000 or 20,000 or 15,000, but the numbers are large. Do you think that the number of women and children, I'm saying specifically women and children that have died, because they're in the thousands no matter how you want to cut it, is that acceptable in what's happening with the conflict with Gaza?
I don't think the loss of a single innocent person is acceptable. We just have to have some sense of reality about the enemy we're dealing with and the battlefield that we're fighting on. Hamas turned all of Gaza into an integrated, weaponized landscape. We're talking military tunnels connecting all positions in Gaza, apartment buildings turned into military bases, weapons pre-positioned, snipers, rocket-propelled grenades, urban warfare. It's extremely dangerous, but this is where the Hamas terrorist army chose to fight from. And Israel cannot allow the Hamas terrorist army to have immunity because it has decided to embed itself in the civilian population. So all that Israel can do is do as much as possible to distinguish between Hamas combatants and non-combatants in Gaza, to attempt when possible to give early warnings to people to evacuate. But because the government of Egypt has not allowed its border to be open, the situation in Gaza has become quite difficult, and it is a horrific war that we do not want, we never wanted, and we want it to end as fast as possible with the destruction of the Hamas military regime in Gaza and the safe return of the hostages. And until this happens, unfortunately, the war is going to continue because the Hamas terrorist army is walking distance from Israeli villages. They have military positions in apartment buildings, walking distance from Israel, and the Israeli army does not want to have enormous numbers of casualties by walking into Gaza and knocking on doors. Unfortunately, Hamas prepared for this war, and the numbers reflect that.
Well, let's just go back now. Let's take all this and look internally and inside of Israel. I mean, what do you think are the prospects in the future for Prime Minister Netanyahu? I mean, is his popularity increasing? Is it not? Where's the future for him in all of this?
It's hard to say. I don't see his popularity as increasing. He was the prime minister on October the 7th, and he was the prime minister for many, many years before that, with a short break for Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Israel is not slated to have elections for a while, so it looks like the prime minister will keep his parliamentary majority. But every week, every day, the people of Israel are protesting in the streets and calling for a new government. It's very hard to make predictions about what's going to happen in Israeli politics, but for now, this is the situation where the prime minister remains the prime minister, and he has a comfortable hold on the Israeli parliament.
Well, the last question for you. Are you optimistic about peace? I mean, all the things we talk about, a seven-front war. I mean, listen, the world as we know it is just, as people would say, going to hell in a handbasket in many ways. But are you optimistic about the future of the region? Yes or no?
The only thing that would give me optimism is if Israel wins the war against the Hamas terrorist regime in Gaza. And only that is what can open the door to a better, peaceful future. Israel does have neighbors that want peaceful, open relations with it. We saw this with the Abraham Accords in 2020, with the UAE and Bahrain and other countries. Israel hopes very much that Saudi Arabia will join this accord, and we can put the Arab-Israeli conflict behind us. But in the meantime, we find ourselves in a very difficult war, which does have some degree of popularity among the Palestinian population and neighboring Arab populations. And the fate of this war, the course of this war, is what will determine if the Middle East will have a future of peace or more war.
Well, listen, Daniel, thanks for being with us, and we could talk for hours about this because it's a very, I hate to say fascinating and a very difficult time, but I do believe personally that what's happening in the Middle East is just a kind of a microcosm about what's happening around the world, and I hope it all gets resolved quite peacefully as peacefully as